views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Get ready for a game changer. Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, Sarah will bring you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Now here's your host, Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to the Conscious Business Radio Network. Freedom of speech is something that we must be vigilant to maintain. Naomi Wolf has a great quote where she says, "The First Amendment was designed to allow for disruption of business as usual. It is not quiet and subdued amendment or right." And I think that is so true. It's going to be loud. It's going to be in your face at times. There are going to be individuals who spread hatred and fear and other social ills, but this is the price of freedom. I'm going to tell you a story about my father's childhood friend and later college roommate, who was David Goldberger. He was the ACLU lawyer who famously defended the Nazis in the important landmark case, the National Socialist Party of America versus the village of Skokie. For anybody who is a little older, they would remember that, or if anybody has studied history or the Constitution, they would know this landmark case. Goldberger was a Jewish lawyer who, against the wishes of his mother and other people in his community, he defended the free speech of the most disliked group in America and perhaps the world at that time, which were the Nazis. Goldberger believed, and so did the ACLU, that freedom of speech belongs to everyone, not just to those you agree with. He was a true American hero who, for the general good of the country, risked his personal relationships and risked being an outcast within his own community. Today, we need that same courage to ensure our freedoms stay intact in the new communication age that we find ourselves in today. I'm going to tell you a story about, my father has a lot of stories about his college days and so forth, about his friend with David. But he recalls a time in college when an obnoxious individual came and hung a burning cross on the outside of their dorm room. And my father has a temper, and he went out there and he caught the guy. And this is actually a funny tale. He lifted him up by his shirt, and he was really mad, and he was threatened to beat him up. And the guy literally crapped his pants and he ran away. And now that's a funny story. And but what's amazing about that is David Goldberger remained calm the whole time. He had become accustomed to a certain level of harassment and discrimination. You got to remember, at this time, it wasn't that far after the World War II. And so people remember the discrimination against the Jewish people, and occurrences like this made his defense of the Nazis that much more incredible. And that's the kind of courage and self-sacrifice that we need in our world today to make sure that freedom of speech continues. We can't allow people to be silenced when we have something that makes us feel uncomfortable, when it's important that these rights are maintained. Well, this episode of Business Game Changers, we discuss freedom of speech and whether our rights are being slowly eroded. Daniel List, a.k.a. Dark Journalist, rejoined us today, and we dive into this topic. He explains what is happening to journalists in the United States and how Google, Facebook, our government, and other entities are systematically censoring the alternative media and silencing journalists. Just a little background on Daniel. He calls himself Dark Journalist, and he coined that term. And he is an independent journalist and thought leader in the alternative media. His work is heavily sought after because of the professional manner in which he covers important topics that are typically shunned by the mainstream media. He has been very popular online, racking up millions of views by his followers. And we are going to have Daniel list join us right now. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad that you're back.
Yes, it's great to be back.
I love talking to you. You have really interesting things to talk about.
Well, I've been listening to your show recently, and I'm a regular listener, as you know, and you've been cracking a lot of fantastic territory also.
I've had some really great people on lately, and I have some really great ones coming up, including this interview that I have right now, which is going to be really interesting. And let's get into this, because we're going to be talking about alternative media, and you have talked about the crackdown on alternative media. And what have you seen take place that brings you to this conclusion?
Well, it's very interesting, actually. With Dark Journalist, which is my show, that I've been building up over time. I've been tracking media patterns all the way back to the 1940s and 50s, so I can see the kind of developments of how the press became corrupt and how the corporate press took over, especially with the consolidation in the past 20 years of most media entities into 6 corporations. So basically, every single thing that we were seeing was controlled by a small group of corporations. Now, what started to happen was that the alternative media, by and large, the sites that were not,
with the advent of the internet. So basically, the conglomerate, all these 6 corporations happened before the internet really became popular in the early 90s, right?
In the early 90s. There's no question that there was a wave with the internet that really boosted this. There were seeds of alternative media. I mean, you can go back to the 1970s, and there's a very popular radio show, which is Mae Brussel, which is kind of like the first podcast in a weird way, because people traded those cassettes.
So it was really radio versus now we have a plethora of other kinds of media.
There's no question that talk radio was the first version of alternative media, because, I mean, there was zines and there were different movements like that. The reason I mentioned Mae Brussels' show is because people really traded the tapes the way that people plug in podcasts and stuff nowadays. It wasn't really married to any one particular station. It wasn't married to any one thing. But what she did was incredibly deep research around where the media was getting its funding, where the politicians were coming from, what corporations and what nonprofits were giving grants and who was doing favors for who. And it was really hardcore journalism, really. So she sort of set the mold. And I think, in a way, she was coming from a more left-wing thing. I think even John Lennon had funded some of her research and stuff. So she came in from this whole angle during the Nixon era.
Well, that's incredible research. Do we have anybody that's comparable to that now?
Well, it's interesting. Certainly, there's a number of people in journalism who I think, more high-profile journalists, that came out and they were starting to realize there were trends, especially with the Obama administration crackdown on journalists. The Obama administration has used the Espionage Act on journalists more than all presidents combined since it was announced in 1917. It was actually Woodrow Wilson put together the Espionage Act for World War I. So for them to use it as a strange loophole to get people to be quiet about certain things, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership or like NSA spying and things like that, is really outrageous when you think about it. And one of these journalists actually was called Cheryl Atkinson. She had an amazing book called Stonewall, where she realized when she started to work on these areas that the Obama administration didn't want her to look into, especially around NSA spying, that she started to get spied on, and she was surveilled, and her laptop was completely throttled by the intel teams that were looking into what she had and so on. And there were a number of things that happened there, and CBS at a certain point went with her. They actually backed her up for a little while, and then they were like, no mas.
It just got too much heat.
Yeah, exactly. And so she went out on her own, and now she does a lot of work, and that book was a bestseller. It was a great expose. Here we have a mainstream journalist trying to do a mainstream job of journalism. And, there are other cases, I think, that have used the Espionage Act in this way, which is a foreshadowing of what's happening now in the alternative media. There's another case I can think of, which is the case of James Risen, which is a very interesting story, actually. He got involved in a case where the Justice Department very much wanted to force him to testify and reveal his source and so on. And it was all about this case that involved Jeffrey Sterling, which is a long story here, but you can look it up, and certainly we do some coverage on it. But all that precipitated this incredible pressure, and they try to subpoena him, and the Obama administration really tried to force the issue of having this guy testify. And even when courts would drop it, the Obama administration kept coming back to it, and so on. So this led to a big battle. I think
it was really harassment, because even though they had no case in court, they were still the powers were still going after him politically,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with the Espionage Act. But then there's other journalists. I think what you're saying is not only do we have more people under the Espionage Act, but people have been targeted by these political powers, and also people have been killed. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. Well, Michael Hastings is a particularly important subject on that. I think he would be somebody I would identify, which is, technically his death was an accident, but certainly with the types of things that he was looking into, again, this is a guy who did a great deal of reporting about the Pentagon, and actually through his reporting, a top general serving in Afghanistan, it was revealed, certain things that he had said about having lack of respect for the leadership. And he actually got replaced in that whole thing with McChrystal. And it's a long story, but the idea was that he had a way of penetrating into what we were doing in Afghanistan, how the military operated, and so forth. And he was working on a story that had to do with drug running. And then suddenly they found him in this bizarre accident where his engine was found 27 feet from the car. And so Hastings, I think, became, a lot of these things became a strange echo around, what is the nature of journalism in America today? And so it's a very important thing, the free speech, the free press, it's such a core thing. But what happens when these people, even like Cheryl Atkinson, as we were talking about for CBS News, she comes forward and says, well, the Obama administration was harassing me and surveilling me because I was getting too close to their secrets, basically. And, she's operating legally as a journalist, getting her sources. So I think, it's not just the Obama administration, of course, the Bush administration.
Sure.
And the Clinton administration before them, really. They took a lot of journalists to task. But the idea that the Obama administration, using this kind of strange loophole of will prosecute you under the Espionage Act, is to send a chilling effect through the world of journalism in terms of what you can cover. So you can't look into this. You can't look into this type of political corruption. You can't look into surveillance. Well, you're getting into Homeland Security. So it's a way of protecting. And, of course, when you're in politics, the power structure always wants to protect itself. But when they go outside the law protecting themselves, then I think we have an issue in America with the free press and with journalism in general.
Well, that's the pillar of freedom, right? If we don't have free press, then we don't have freedom. And in a fragile democracy, it's even more important for there to be open debate and transparency.
Well, we have kind of a schizophrenic situation. America on the press, I'll tell you. And I think that's what I'm doing here and what you're doing here is sort of trying to sort that part out. Because, for example, we had this thing that railroaded through Congress called the Media Shield Act, and that came up as a result of this case I was referencing earlier with James Risen. And the Media Shield Act was meant to say, if you are a journalist and you come forward and you give information, you can't be prosecuted. And if you hold your sources back, you can't be prosecuted. And during the process of when this went through was the Snowden period. And they were like, well, we have to put all these national security loopholes in. You're protecting all the wrong people. And it became this thing where you literally could go after anybody. So it's doing the opposite of what the bill says it does. And Dianne Feinstein famously went on the record saying that, well, I'll tell you, if, I'm not going to protect some 17-year-old blogger, out there with this. So, so she came forward and basically put it in those terms, that anyone who was doing journalism that wasn't state-sanctioned or corporate sanctioned was a 17-year-old blogger. So she wasn't going to protect him, was her whole thing. And she was a major voice for stripping those protections out. So it's a very strange situation that we're in. Now, there are movements. You might notice that right after France, for example, had these recent attacks, one of the things that